Hello everyone, and welcome to another review, this time for the game, and this is a mouthful, Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Gate Daemonhunters by Complex Games. Sorry that there was a bit of delay on this one, and it's probably been posted a few days later than the launch. I had a lot going on, it was swamped, so I wasn't able to put my full attention on this. Rest assured though that I've done my due diligence and completed everything that needed to be so to properly review this game, and it was one that I was quite excited about reviewing. I want to preface this review by saying that there's a lot of really bad 40k games. As someone who is absolutely in love with the 40k universe in general, let's just say that my disappointment has known no bounds with all the crappy mobile games and shovelware that has been 40k stamped as of late. It felt like Games Workshop went from protecting the IP viciously and keeping it sacred, you know, with Dawn of War 1 and 2, but then we got Dawn of War 3, and it just seemed to just be downhill from there. I played so many bad Warhammer games. I mean, so many. And I really hoped that Chaos Gate would live up to the Dawn of War 2 standards after so many fails with other 40k titles. If you recall, I did a preview of Chaos Gate a month or so ago on this channel, and I've been looking forward to it ever since. A 40k game in the theme of XCOM? Could they do it? Would it be as awesome as I'd hoped? The story is really simple to follow, as most 40k plotlines are. You're the commander of a Grey Knight strike force placed into the position after the previous commander died at the hands of a demon. You're tasked with taking the ship back to Titan and reporting after said crusade, but you get stopped along the way. You find out very quickly through an inquisitor that rudely commandeers your ship that Nurgle's being a douchebag, and you are tasked with stopping a massive plague that is currently rippling through part of the galaxy with gratuitous amounts of issues being caused. You have to solve this with a lot of violence and mayhem to make everything better. Simple, yeah?
Farewell, Captain. Tech Priest, report.
Hexagramic wards are under maximal pressure.
Commander, we cannot maintain this orbit for long.
Visually, the game is everything I want from a Warhammer 40k game. The models are super shiny, there's big guns, lots of vibrant colors, and I can't complain. Probably the best part of the entire game is the visuals, and they're incredibly faithful to the lore of the universe and the codexes for each race that they represent, specifically the Grey Knights in this instance. The Grey Knights, the game's protagonists, are stunning in every sense of the word, actual walking heroic titans in their own rights, being beacons of awesomeness in a bleak world of the 41st millennium. Enemy design is right up there as well in quality, with most of Nurgle's minions being absolutely grotesque to behold, all covered in boils and sores and all manner of gross things. Some of the static enemies you have to kill, and I'm specifically talking about the squishy flesh trees, are incredibly gross, so you can imagine that they're immensely satisfying to destroy, especially visually with the holy flames of the Emperor. Level visuals are top notch, with each level you go to almost perfectly representing a wasteland battlefield fought over by the Imperium and its Nurgle enemies. It really gives you an idea of how bad mankind is getting their asses kicked in this specific engagement, with all the infested plants and chaos spikes using corpses to grow. You can see evidence of other chapters too, with some levels having drop pods from Ultramarines, for example, strewn around and destroyed with flags and emblems all over the place. Whoever was in charge of their creative department for environments really knocked it out of the park, and I can tell that they're absolutely a hardcore Warhammer fan. At some points, you'll even come across cool places like Eldar ruins. I can't give you more info on that though, because there's huge spoilers tied to it, but they look awesome either way. Sound design supports the visuals perfectly, with each Space Marine sounding like a literal tank stomping through stuff and destroying everything in the way. The sound effects, coupled with the animations for things like door breaching, are just awesome, and I enjoyed smashing doors and tearing down walls just to see those mini cutscenes when you do something cool. Seriously, just take a look.
You have been judged.
The UI is clean, I have no complaints about it, and the campaign interfaces are all great and they themselves tie into the Warhammer universe. You've got very sci-fi techie heads-up displays with Imperial seals and symbols tossed in. No complaints for me again in that regard. The ship is also entirely badass. I've been a huge fan of Imperial cruisers ever since I got into Battlefleet Gothic, so it was awesome to see one in such righteous glory. Now, I'm a big XCOM guy. I've played through both of the PC games and one of the older ones, I forget what it was called, as well as some of the tabletop stuff and Phoenix Protocol, which was a recent game like XCOM. I've done all those games on Legend with Iron Man settings and had a blast while doing it. I like suffering. The reason those games work so well though is because they're designed to be unfair but manageable given you understand what you're doing and maybe get a little lucky. The developers in those games balance things appropriately. There's generally a curve of difficulty that you can plan for and work around, knowing what will work in what circumstance, unless you're missing 95% chance to hits or failing RNG checks, which just happens. My biggest gripe overall with Daemonhunters is it really feels like there's not a lot of balance or foresight put into it, as far as like just balance in general goes, which really hurts it as time progresses. Gameplay consists of the exact same style that XCOM has. You have a squad of 4 Space Marines with action points. Action points can be used to move, shoot, or use abilities. There's no separate movement points, everything's a combined pool. The Marines themselves belong to different classes and have skill trees that allow you to customize their playstyles, augmenting their selected skills in battle when you go to use them. There's of course ranged and melee classes and multiple weapons for each, allowing you to pick and choose what sort of style you like. A round generally consists of you using all your AP on your characters and then the enemy doing the same, with your AP typically resetting when you're out of combat and enter combat for the first time. There's cover, represented by half shields and full shields, and terrain obstacles and hazards that you can use to your advantage. A good example of this is the explosive containers that you can set off with gunfire or grenades to kill everything around them. The problem, however, as you quickly find out, is that there's a few too many RNG mechanics when it comes to the game's timer system, known as the bloom. Bloom goes up in a mission over time naturally, aided in speed by how often you're charging your abilities up with warp power. When Bloom maxes out, it does a random thing, some of these things being incredibly punishing while others are a complete joke, and therein lies the problem. There's also different types of Bloom later on in the campaign, but that's spoilers more related around that, so I'll just leave it at that. I felt like the hardest missions could be complete breezes and the easiest missions could be harder than the hardest difficulty settings. There'd be times when I'm on a hard mission and the most the Bloom would do is give an enemy crit resistance, and other times on quote-unquote easy rated missions, it'd revive everything I ever killed multiple times over again. I hated dealing with it. It felt like it was never something you could play around, and it got real tiresome super quick. The number of times that I'd play a situation perfectly only to have the Bloom max out and revive all the things I killed was far too many, and the sheer number of portals the game likes to spawn on top of you with that mechanic is just too much. Don't get me wrong, I like a challenge, but when your easy, medium, and hard difficulty threat meters don't mean anything, it's a bit of a pain in the ass. There were multiple times I had to reload and save mid-fight just to roll a different Bloom outcome because it was just too much. There's nothing satisfying or enjoyable about entire squads of enemies spawning inches away from your Marines, especially when you have an extremely punishing wounded Marine system. The wound system comes into play when your Space Marines take any damage at all. It's a debuff on their total HP pool that requires weeks, if not months in some cases, to heal. You can absolutely play around it and do very well if you get lucky with the Bloom, but in some cases you just get totally screwed by the mechanic and it feels awful. There also seems to be a glaring issue with some of the random map designs, specifically the Bloom Tree missions, with it being a complete slog to get through the overwhelming number of enemies that can spawn. You'll get Bloom quote-unquote easy missions that have 2 objectives requiring you to fight 2 or 3 dozen enemies over and over, but then on the same hand get a quote-unquote hard version of it that requires you to only kill 1 plant that's lightly guarded. For what it's worth, however, the actual abilities and skills you can utilize in combat on your turns are fantastic. They look great, feel great, and are extremely cool to utilize, and this was enough to keep me going through all the bullshit. There's nothing quite like shooting a massive statue down onto a group of enemies and squishing them all, which is possible in Daemonhunters and even quite frequent. Another balancing issue I need to bring up really quick that's of the same vein related to gear and abilities is that some classes and weapons feel utterly useless when compared to others. Everything is completely weak and baby mode compared to that of just a standard Purgator with a Psy Cannon. Psychic Onslaught, the Psy Cannon's ability, is just too good. It's so good that you're going to be using it throughout the entire campaign and get horribly punished with wounds if you don't. I wanted things like the Flamethrower to be good, but they're just not by comparison, and it's just so unfair. Melee can be strong, but it requires you to get in close, which can backfire horribly. But man, does the Psy Cannon not care about any of that. It just tears through enemies to glorious effects, too much so, honestly, that at a certain point I was just running double healers and purgators because it was just too good not to. One final but major complaint that I need to make is that the mission types are extremely samey. There's way too many instances of the same common missions throughout the entire playthrough. Destroy bloom trees and harvest seeds. These have minor differences every now and then, but they're just going to be something that you run into nonstop throughout your run. I mean, I remember thinking at 16 hours, is this all I'm doing, really? Because it felt like that. It just felt like the same two missions. I went back and checked my footage to make sure I wasn't mad, and yeah, they're just mostly the same. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some really cool boss fights like the one seen right now on screen, and there's some really good individual one-off missions, but god did all the other filler missions feel like the same for hours and hours and hours at a time. Maybe it's because I was too effective at handling the spread of the virus on the campaign map and never let things escalate. I don't know, but to me, throughout the entire game, I pretty much was just doing the same thing, and it was a little bit of a letdown. The ending and the few final missions were super cool, but god, at times getting through it felt so slow. And it took me about 30 hours in total to finish my first run. As far as out of combat campaign systems and things for travel, they're pretty great. You've got your barracks, which allows you to outfit and adjust your Astartes with weapons and armor you acquire from missions you complete. It also allows you to swap out cosmetics and appearances to fit the style you truly want, which is just another added bonus. Gear has tiers of quality and upgrades you can unlock later on, further adding customization, and the epic gear actually looks amazing and changes your Marine's visual looks. I mean, just seriously, look at how badass this squad looks right now. As I mentioned earlier, your soldiers also have skill trees and talent points that you can spend by promoting them, all pretty standard fare for a game like this, accessible after you complete missions or in the barracks whenever needed. The Inquisition Research tab consists of 2 trees you can go down, one that mostly consists of stratagems, and the other tree that kind of has a bunch of research related to the bloom, but also a few stratagems as well. Stratagems are cards that you can deploy in battle like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Master to give you buffs and advantages or to harm enemies. They do things like teleporting all your guys, crippling all enemies, healing everyone, so on and so forth. It's a cool system and I approve. The passives consist of things like slower balloon gain, enemy insights, corruption resistance, and prognosticar upgrades. Prognosticars are psychics that you can deploy on your campaign map to slow corruption, so the upgrades for them are especially important if you want to keep down the plague. Finally, you have your Manufactorum, honestly my favorite part of the ship, managed by your tech priest and involving various upgrades to facilities and the ship itself. The best part of all this is that you can even upgrade far enough to get the ability to exterminatus an entire sector, annihilating all of the corruption and unfortunately all the inhabitants that live there in one quick blow. They let you blow up a planet. Space travel is simple yet effective, with various trigger events happening as your ship darts around trying to single-handedly stop the plague apocalypse. You'll get many various little decisions that give you buffs or debuffs depending on what you choose, and I found those little decisions, they just added flavor to what you did, and I wasn't ever incredibly punished or super benefited by them. Before I wrap things up and give a summary of my thoughts and a final score, I want to mention that I encountered a few bugs on the press version I had. At one point, I figured out how to cause a stack overflow, I think, or something, to give my soldiers infinite skill points, well, at least a few of them, but this completely broke their promotions. After the day 1 patch, I wasn't able to replicate this again, so there's no worries for new players, and it seems to be a non-issue, but it was annoying for me. There were also a lot of little micro stutters and FPS problems still present as far as for me testing today. It wasn't anything awful, but it was definitely noticeable even on a 3090, and we'll have to see if they ironed those out with the latest drivers and a few more patches. And I have to mention that the game just eats, I mean, eats your GPU for some reason or another. I think it might be Denuvo doing it, but yeah, there were multiple times when I looked and I was at 100% GPU usage on a 3090 Ti. This stuff happened during pre-rendered cutscenes locked to 30 FPS as well, which is not okay, and I hope it gets fixed. I can't even believe this, like, absolutely. Do you know how crazy it is for a program to eat all available resources on a 3090 Ti? A 3090 Ti. Okay, do you know how insane that is? The amount of video memory I have and the amount of power a 3090 Ti has, I can run like 16 instances of Call of Duty. Overall, I enjoyed Daemonhunters. It was a breath of fresh air in a sea of bad Warhammer games I've had to put up with in recent times. It wasn't by any means, in my opinion, the best 40K title. That belongs to Space Marine or Dawn of War, but it's definitely up there in terms of good ones. I can easily overlook some of the issues it has because I love the universe and style of the game so much. I'm sure others feel the same, and I'm hopeful that with a few patches and maybe some balancing, all of my gripes will be solved. That'd be great. Here's the breakdown. Gameplay gets a 6 out of 10. It's held back from being any higher by poor balancing decisions and incredibly annoying RNG mechanics. Too many identical missions nonstop. Story gets an 8 out of 10. It's pretty good. The characters suit their roles well, and it was neat to see where it went. About as good as it could be for this game. Graphics get a 10 out of 10. They're superb and give me everything I want in a 40K game. They're just so good. I can't overstate that. Audio gets an 8 out of 10. Everything from the footsteps to the gunshots to the explosions sound great. Could have used more voice acting to carry it further to get that 9 or 10, and it was lacking a little bit in that regard. And value gets a strong 7 out of 10. $45 for 30 to 40 hours of gameplay is pretty good these days. Not bad for the price. My final score, however, for Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Gate Daemonhunters, again, huge mouthful, is going to land on a great 8 out of 10. Something I could suggest that most Warhammer fans pick up when you get the chance, especially if you were a fan of any of the XCOM games. I could easily see the score being a 7 or so if you're not a die-hard Warhammer fan, especially with some of the annoying systems, but to me, just being able to run around as a Grey Knight Terminator and blow shit up really carried it higher. Anyway, that's it for Daemonhunters. Let me know what you thought personally and what you thought of the review in the comments, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and like it. Feel free to share it with friends and help spread word of this channel existing. Every little bit is appreciated. Until the next video, this is Delrith, and I'll be seeing ya. Bye.